Mr. President, as we all know, our government is now in its second full day of a shutdown. Public opinion is swinging against what is happening, and as that occurs, it has been interesting to me to see that the talking points have changed on the part of congressional Democrats. We've just seen an example of that here on the Senate floor. But let's first look at a few uncontested facts. Our government has been operating since September 30 of last year under a series of continuing resolutions, CRs. In other words, Congress has passed a series of temporary funding bills instead of enacting appropriations for the full fiscal year. This is not an ideal practice. There's plenty of blame to go around, but it is generally considered better than allowing a funding lapse and the government to shut down. We've heard about generals and Pentagon officials decrying the practice of continuing resolutions. I can assure you, Mr. President, and I can assure my colleagues that generals and defense officials like government shutdowns far less than temporary spending bills. So let's not say that we're taking the advice of our military leaders in shutting the government down. The last CR was adopted to run until midnight of January 19th, this past Friday night. And that's the date on which our Democratic colleagues decided not to extend temporary funding for the entire federal government for one more month. The specific reason the Democratic leadership gave for not agreeing to another CR was the DACA program, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, a program designed to protect those young immigrants who were brought to America illegally through no fault of their own. President Obama implemented this program through executive order, and President Trump, believing that it was better to handle this issue through legislation, decided to end the program in March of this year. And in ending the DACA executive order, President Trump has called on Congress to formulate a legislative, statutory fix for DACA recipients. We should bear in mind that Republicans and Democrats have been working on a DACA solution and continue to work on a DACA solution and will continue to do so. There are other important immigration issues I believe should be attached to the DACA issue, including the funding of a border wall and the replacement for chain migration. Chain migration, as we know, is the practice of allowing immigration lottery persons to bring in a host of relatives to the United States. The good news in this regard is that negotiators have until March to reach a deal on DACA. It is also a fact, that this government shutdown is happening because an overwhelming majority of Senate Democrats voted no on a cloture motion to bring a new funding bill to a vote. Now, cloture votes take 60 votes. And my Democratic friends can say it until they're blue in the face. The Republicans are in charge of the entire government, that we're in charge of the Senate, in charge of the House and the presidency. But that does not get away from the fact that it takes bipartisan support to end a filibuster. It takes 60 votes. It takes Democrats and Republicans in this Senate to move to cloture on a new funding bill. And it's simply a fact that a majority of Democrats voted no, and that's why we're in a shutdown. Another undisputed fact is that the most recent CR would have run until mid-February, and that the DACA program, this program for childhood arrivals, is not set to expire until March. So how does it make any sense to shut down the government over a program that will last longer than the temporary funding bill? It doesn't. And yet that is exactly what our Democratic friends decided to do, to shut down the government on an immigration issue. Here's a front page of Friday's New York Times, not exactly known as a great friend to the Republican Party, It says, Mr. President, Senate showdown looms as spending bill advances. This is the morning before the evening when our Democratic friends refuse to fund the government. House approves a stopgap measure while Democrats dig in on immigration. It was an immigration issue that caused the Democrats to dig in, according to the New York Times. The Washington Post reports the same. Shutdown looms despite House action, and the subhead said Democrats tied dreamers, another way to say the DACA recipients. Democrats tied dreamers to passage of a budget deal. Again, the headline by not exactly the strongest Republican paper in the country, the Washington Post. So I find it interesting, Mr. President, to hear Democrats now talking about other reasons for their votes to shut down the federal government, reasons unrelated to the immigration issue, which was their real reason. We've seen it on the Senate floor tonight. We saw it yesterday on the Senate floor. A colloquy of distinguished Democratic senators talked extensively about the S-chip program for children's health as having somehow been inadequately treated in the CR they helped to defeat. My colleague from South Dakota pointed out just a few moments ago that, in fact, the continuing resolution provided for a 6-year extension of the S-chip program for these 9 million Americans. And yet somehow that became a reason. It was a reason listed by my good friend from New Jersey just a moment ago. I tuned into House proceedings yesterday and heard Democrats there going on at length about community health centers all of a sudden, and then about flood and hurricane relief. We've heard on the floor tonight that a good reason to vote against the CR was that we just done it too many times. 3 times is okay, 4 times just too many. Of course, they propose yet another 4th CR. It's only a CR that they would prefer to vote for. We hear them talk about tax cuts for the wealthy, National Institutes of Health, opioids. This Congress has done marvelous work for this pressing opioid program. Medicaid has been mentioned. Medicaid, Mr. President, is a mandatory program, has nothing whatsoever to do with the year-to-year appropriation bills. We just heard every reason in the world other than the reason that the national press has pointed out. This is an immigration dispute that doesn't even ripen till March. And our friends have refused to give us 60 votes to bring that to a close. I wonder why that is. Could it be that our Democratic friends are beginning to realize that shutting down the government over an immigration dispute is not turning out to be a winner for them? It may be that they've read the most recent CNN poll. That poll showed 56% of Americans saying that approving a budget to avoid a shutdown is more important than continuing the DACA program. Let me repeat that. 56% of Americans said approve a budget, avoid a shutdown. Only 34% chose DACA over a shutdown. Maybe that poll and other indications of public disapproval have caused those who voted for the shutdown to modify their reasons. I hope it causes 60 of us later on tonight to say yes to a solution that will get the government back open. I say to my Democratic colleagues, it might have been nice or even desirable to include a DACA bill in the most recent CR proposal. But there's still at least a month and a half to resolve that issue. We have time to tend to the DACA issue, and we don't need to shut down the government over that issue. What the people cannot understand is how it makes sense to force a shutdown over an issue that is completely unrelated to the temporary spending bill. My Democratic friends now seem to be searching for a fig leaf of a solution so that they can relent and allow the federal government to reopen and to function. I hope they find that reason. Maybe a 3-week CR is that vehicle. If a solution is agreed to, will take about that long to actually write the legislation, but something needs to give, Mr. President, and it needs to give tonight. The American people need this shutdown to end. Our adversaries around the world need to see that we can get our act together. And our military, our security personnel, and all of our public servants deserve the right to get back to the jobs they've signed on to do. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.